Today, I'm going to show you 8 of the biggest red flags to watch out for in dating, because if you don't pay attention to these warning signs, it will destroy your relationship and cause you to be with the wrong person. And we're going to look at some deal breakers where if the person that you're dating has these, then you should break up with them. Hi, my name is David Cipriano. I'm a youth pastor and my goal is to teach the Bible and to help you follow Jesus. So a little bit about me, I've currently been married for 4 years and I've been together with my now wife for 7 years. And I definitely don't know everything about relationships and marriage, but I want to share some of what I've learned and I'm going to give you some biblical principles about dating and relationships. You see, the Bible says in Proverbs 22:3, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." So the Bible tells us that a wise person sees the warning signs and the danger ahead and they stay away. But the simple or the dumb person is going to keep on going and they'll be punished for doing so. And I think that this is often true about relationships. You see, a wise person will see the red flags and stay away, but a foolish person sees the red flags and they don't stay away. They keep on moving forward. You see, a red flag is a warning sign that something needs to change. For example, if your phone is really low on battery, your phone gives you a warning. It gives you a notification that your phone is almost dead. And if you ignore that warning sign and just keep on using your phone anyways, then your phone will eventually die. And it's a result of ignoring the warning signs. You know, sometimes a person that you date is going to have some red flags. And while I'm not going to say that you should expect perfection out of that other person, while I'm not saying that if they ever do anything wrong, then you have to dump them, I am saying that we need to pay attention to the warning signs. We have to be on the lookout for some red flags. And when it comes to red flags, sometimes these are about people or individuals, but I think that it can also be said about relationships, where the red flag isn't just about one of the two people, but about the couple or the relationship. And I just want to encourage everybody who's listening to this to have some really high standards in dating. Now, I realize that there's a few people in the world who need to maybe be more realistic and accepting of other people's faults. But I really think that by far, a vast majority of people need to have some higher standards, because there's a lot of people who will put up with somebody who doesn't treat them right. Sometimes a Christian will love a person who doesn't love Jesus. And sometimes when you're in a relationship, you begin to become so attached to that person that you start to ignore and justify their many faults. So in today's episode of the podcast, we're going to look at 8 red flags to watch out for in dating. And certainly we could cover a lot more than 8 red flags, but I think that these are some of the most common ones. And before we get into that, if you could give us a like or to give us a rating, depending on what platform you're listening on, that would greatly help us to reach more people and to help people follow Jesus. So with that being said, here's red flag number 1, and it's when they're not following Jesus. Hey, I believe that if you're a Christian, the number 1 most important thing to look for in that other person is, are they following Jesus? You see, Paul reminds us in Colossians 1:18 that in all things, Jesus should have the preeminence. So that means that in every area of your life, Jesus is the most important thing. And I believe that Jesus should be the most important person in your relationship. Meaning that the most important person isn't the guy and it's not the girl. No, it's Christ. Christ should be the center of your dating life. And so if you're going to date a person who follows Jesus, then first of all, they must be saved. You see, God designed marriage to be equally yoked. And we're reminded of this in 2 Corinthians 6:14 and 15. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And so the Bible is very clear that a Christian should never marry a non-Christian, which also means that a Christian should never date a non-Christian. And I believe that there's no justification for doing so. There's no good reason for a believer to be with a non-believer. Hey, don't give them your heart if God doesn't have theirs. Amos 3:3 says, "Can two walk together except they be agreed?" So the Bible shows that two people can't work together unless they're agreed. Two people shouldn't be in a relationship if they're walking in different, opposite directions, if they're going contrary ways to each other. And this matter of faith is extremely important in relationships and in marriage, and one of the reasons is because it greatly affects how you raise your children. It affects what your children are going to believe. When you're a parent of a child, your faith will determine what values you're going to have in the home. You see, this isn't a matter of just religion. No, your faith is going to affect every aspect of your life. And maybe you don't think that it's that important, but let me tell you that it is. Now, often Christians will say something about how they married a non-Christian and now that person is a Christian, and they'll use their personal story to justify being with a non-believer. But really, the ends don't justify the means. Just because it worked doesn't mean that it was the right decision. Hey, you can do the wrong thing and still get a good result. Just because some people win the lottery, that doesn't mean that you should spend all of your money on lottery tickets. And we have to realize that the Bible very clearly commands us to not do this thing. The Bible commands us that if you're a believer, you shouldn't marry a non-believer, so you can't have a good justification for doing so. Your personal story does not trump the Bible, and you have to consider, what if they don't become a Christian? Because people like to justify dating a non-Christian because sometimes that person might become a Christian, and yet they're ignoring the majority of cases where that person doesn't become one. So you might ask yourself, what if they become a Christian? What if they get saved and accept Jesus? Well, I ask you, what if they don't? See, don't pick a wrong person hoping that they become right. No, just pick a right person. And if your real goal is to be married to a Christian, why would you choose a non-Christian and hope to change them rather than just finding a Christian? You see, it makes no sense. See, people will often try to justify the wrong relationship by saying, what if they change? They might try to point to some other person who did change and use that as a good excuse. But let's try to use that exact same logic but with a different variable. Let's say that somebody says that you shouldn't be with an abusive person. Well, it might be possible for an abusive person to become a non-abusive person and change. But what if they don't? Why would you want to be with the abuser rather than just finding somebody who treats you right? See, this is just not good logic to defend being in the wrong relationship. Why would you want to pick the wrong person and hope they change instead of waiting for the right person who doesn't need to be changed? And remember, don't go into a relationship thinking, I can fix them. No, just wait for somebody that you don't have to fix. Now, when it comes to the matter of Christians being married to non-Christians, some people will try to justify it by pointing to 1 Corinthians 7, where it says, But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. And the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. And so people will point to this example in the Bible of how Paul says that if a Christian is married to a non-Christian, then they shouldn't leave them unless the other one leaves them. But really, this is another bad justification for being in a relationship with a non-believer, because 1 Corinthians 7 is not about getting married to a non-Christian. No, it's for people who are already married to a non-Christian. And so according to the Bible, if you're already married to them, then you can stay with them. But if you're not married to one, then don't. See, this command was for people already in the wrong relationship. It's not giving you a justification for getting into the wrong relationship. And in addition to being saved, they also need to be living for God. So it's not enough for a person to just be saved or to go to church or to be from a Christian family. No, they need to be actually following Jesus. They need to be obeying God. They need to be consistently following the Bible. You see, this word Christian doesn't just refer to a person who's saved. It means Christ follower. So it's not just a person who identifies as a Christian, not just a person who attends church services, not just a person who got saved a long time ago. No, it's a person who's daily, consistently following Jesus. And if you're a person who's saved, but you're not following Christ, then I would say that you're not a Christian. Now, that doesn't mean that you lost your salvation, but it means that you don't properly fit the term Christ follower. And I would challenge you that if you're dating somebody, you need to consider to yourself, is that person helping you to be a better Christian or a worse one? Are they being a good influence or a bad one? And they can't be neither. This person cannot be a neutral influence in your life. So they're either a bad one or a good one. They're either bringing you closer to Jesus or they're driving you farther away from him. And in an ideal relationship, you should be leading each other closer to Christ. And so in dating, it's a serious red flag when that other person isn't following Jesus. Number 2, it's a red flag when your family and your friends don't like them. As a youth pastor, I encourage my teenagers all the time, if your parents don't like that person, that's a bad sign. If your mom or your dad don't approve of the relationship, then stay away from them. Now, I realize that there could be a situation where there's a person who's a Christian and they have a parent who's a non-Christian, and so they automatically wouldn't approve of any relationship with another Christian. But for the people who have good parents who are following the Lord, you should listen to them. And sometimes whenever people are confronted about the person that they're with, that person might say, oh, my parents just don't know what they're talking about. This person's actually really nice. But here's what Proverbs says in Proverbs 11:14. It says, where no counsel is, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. So the Bible says that whenever people don't listen to counsel, they're going to fall. But whenever there's a lot of counselors, and when you're listening to their advice, you'll be safe. In Proverbs 12:15, it says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. And so the Bible shows us that a fool always thinks that he's right. A fool doesn't come to the realization that they're wrong, and a fool doesn't listen to advice. And you can easily convince yourself that the wrong person is the right person. There's a lot of people stuck in bad relationships because they fail to have good judgment. They're being a fool, and they think to themselves that this person is fine for them, when in reality, they're not. And their friends know that that person isn't good for them. Their family knows that that person isn't good for them. And I just want to tell you that other people will often have better thoughts about your relationship than you do, Because if you're with the wrong person, you might feel emotionally attached to them and you can't see things clearly. But the people around you don't have that emotional attachment, and they're able to give you advice that you wouldn't have come up with on your own. Other people have an outside perspective. Other people can sometimes see things more logically and more clearly. And here I'm not really talking about arranged marriages. I'm not talking about that at all. Rather, I'm speaking about looking to other people as counselors and advisors, because there's people in your life who can and want to help you. And I often tell my teenagers in my youth group that your parents are smarter than you. And maybe they don't believe that, but as an adult now, I know that it's true. Hey, your parents have probably made some mistakes in their lives that they don't want for their children to make. Parents will know things from experience that they want for their children to know. And sometimes in a relationship, other people might tell you something that you don't want to hear. They might tell you that that guy or that girl is bad for you. And really, if they're doing so, they're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to help you. And if a trusted person in your life is telling you that that other person isn't good for you, you ought to listen. It's a red flag when the people who you love and who love you don't love the person that you're with. And the Bible says in Proverbs 27:6, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." Hey, sometimes a person will want a relationship so badly that they will accept the wrong person. And sometimes a person will justify all of their faults because they really just want it to work. And sometimes they might say something like, "You just need to know them. They have a really good heart, actually," or "They're really working on their faults." And I believe that these are some of the lies that people tell themselves while trying to justify being with the wrong person. And hey, if you've become attached to a person, then you'll start to ignore all of the red flags. You'll start to give them a benefit of the doubt to an extreme degree. Hey, I remember knowing a girl growing up who had a boyfriend who would beat her, leaving bruises all over her. And I remember this girl's parents would try to split them up, and they would try to keep them apart. And yet, the girl resented her parents for doing so. She couldn't understand why they were trying to keep them away from each other. And you see, what had happened was that she became so attached that she couldn't see reality. She became emotionally involved to a level where she couldn't see things as they were. And this is really one of the big dangers in relationships, that people will become attached to the wrong person and then they can't see things objectively. And I would encourage you, if you're in a relationship with a person who your parents or your friends or the trusted people in your life aren't a fan of, that that's a red flag. That's a sign that maybe you need to end things. The third red flag is when a relationship is a tool to get something else. You see, sometimes in a relationship, the people aren't that serious about each other. They just see the relationship as a means to an end. And when this happens, it's really just a fake relationship. It's not sincere. You see, sometimes people will be with somebody else as a rebound or a distraction. Hey, relationships shouldn't be replacements. After you get out of a relationship, don't have the attitude that I need to have a new girlfriend or I need to have a new boyfriend. No, if you get out of a long or a serious relationship, then I encourage you, don't date somebody right away. You have to give yourself time to get over that last person. And sometimes people will date somebody as a rebound. They'll be with somebody so that they can be distracted. And I would just tell you, don't treat another person that way, and don't let another person treat you that way. And this is really just a fake relationship. It's not sincere, it's not meaningful. And I would just tell you that if you have a habit of these fake relationships, It's probably going to be really hard to have a real relationship one day. Maybe it seems harmless right now, maybe it just seems temporary, but you don't realize the damage that you're causing to your future. And sometimes I think that there's people who won't commit to a person because they've never actually committed to somebody before. Hey, it's a red flag when a relationship is a tool to get something else. Sometimes people will use another person and date them to try to gain popularity or status. There's a lot of people who want to date the popular person or to marry the trophy wife, not because they really love that person, but because of what that person does for them. It makes them feel good, it gives them some bragging rights, it boosts their ego a little bit. Hey, this is just a tool to get something else. Sometimes relationships exist just because of the physical aspect of them. Sometimes this is called having friends with benefits, where a person will be with somebody just to try to satisfy a desire. And I think that there's a lot of couples who are only together just to have somebody to be physical with. They see that other person as a means to an end. Sometimes people will be with somebody just for the gifts that they give them or just because they want attention. But really, if you're in a relationship and if you're dating somebody, you need to be taking that relationship seriously. Hey, don't steal their heart. Don't take advantage of that other person. Don't play with their emotions. It's a major red flag when a relationship is a tool to get something else. And these relationships do more harm than good. The fourth red flag in dating is when it becomes too physical. So for starters, the Bible makes it clear that it's a sin to have sex before marriage. Hebrews 13:4 says, "Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge." And I want to make something very clear here, because I'm not going to say that sex is bad. No, sex was designed by God, and sex is a good thing. But it's only a good thing in the right place. Sex is a dangerous and destructive thing when it's in the wrong place. You see, it's kind of like fire, because fire is good in the right place. Fire can keep people warm, it can cook your food. Fire is a good thing, but it's a very bad thing and a very dangerous thing when it's in the wrong place. And the same thing is true about sex, because sex in marriage is a good thing that was designed by God, but sex before marriage or sex outside of marriage is wrong, it's a sin, and it goes against God. Jesus said in Mark 7, "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man." Hey, pay attention to some of the very wicked things that fornication and adultery is listed in. It's listed along things like murder, theft, blasphemy. This is not a harmless sin. No, this is a very serious one. In 1 Corinthians 6, it says, "Flee fornication. Every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. What, know ye not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost which is in you, which ye have of God, and ye are not your own?" And so as Christians, we have been bought by Jesus Christ. Our body is the temple of the Holy Ghost. And what a shame it is when we use those bodies to sin, when we use our bodies to go against the will of God. Hey, a boyfriend and a girlfriend should never be living together. They shouldn't be sleeping together. They shouldn't be spending the night at each other's houses. And it doesn't matter if you say, "We're going to be married one day." It doesn't matter if you're already engaged or if everybody else is doing it. Sometimes people will say, "We've already done it, so it can't hurt to do it again." Sometimes people will justify sex before marriage by saying we're doing it safely, we're using protection, we're being careful. But no, the Bible makes things very clear that this is a sin. It's wrong and you shouldn't be doing it. So the Bible makes it very clear that Christians should not be having sex before or outside of marriage. And now when it comes to touching or physical affection, the Bible doesn't really give explicit instructions here. Rather, it's a personal conviction. And don't take this the wrong way, because I'm not saying that to say everything's good, just do whatever you want and it will be fine. No, if you're an adult, you can decide where the boundaries are based on things like biblical principles, the guiding of the Holy Spirit, good counsel from trusted people in your life. And I think that if you're a teenager, if you're under your parents' authority, then that standard for being physical needs to be set by your parents. You should do what they say, don't go behind their backs. And the Bible commands you to honor and obey your parents. And I would just caution everybody to be careful here, because when it comes to physical things, one thing leads to another really quickly. And sometimes in dating, once you get to a certain point, it can be hard to not do more. And I really believe that one of the greatest virtues in a relationship is patience. And I would beware of another person who's constantly pushing your boundaries. If you set some guidelines and boundaries, it's a red flag if that other person doesn't respect them. If they're constantly pressuring you to do more, that might be a sign to end things. And I would just encourage everybody that when it comes to touching and physical affection, don't just focus on what's okay or what's not wrong or what's not necessarily a sin or what's allowed, but really just focus on what's best. Don't just ask what's wrong with it, ask what's best. Now, red flag number 5 is when you can't have healthy conflict. Now, we should all realize that in a relationship, there will be conflict. You and that other person will disagree sometimes. You won't always want the same things. And really, that's okay. That's normal. Hey, if there's no conflict, that's probably a sign that it's not very serious yet, or worse, that one person is never getting their way. And so we should realize that conflict is normal and it should be expected. But it's a really bad sign when you can't have good conflict. You see, there are some ways to disagree and have conflict, but it needs to be in good faith. And here's some signs of unhealthy conflict: yelling, a temper problem, throwing things. Hey, a person who can't keep their cool or who raises their voice really loudly, that's a person who has no self-control. Another red flag, a serious one, is abuse or hitting. If you guys have an argument and they respond with physical abuse, then I would leave that person immediately. If they do it once, then they'll probably do it again. And sometimes a person will stick with that abuser, and sometimes when that abuser hurts that other person and yet they can still be with them, they get the message that they can do it again and they won't have to suffer any consequences. Now, this is not me blaming the victim. If you're the victim of this, I'm not trying to say that you're the problem, but what I'm saying is that if you tolerate it and let them, then they'll probably do it again. I would also watch out for a person who has habits of gaslighting, manipulation, lying. Watch out for a person who exaggerates things and uses absolute language. If a person says things like, you always do this, you never do that, that's a sign of some unhealthy conflict. I would watch out for personal attacks. These are known as ad hominems, where if you're arguing about something, then you attack that person instead of talking about the actual conflict. So if a couple is arguing about something, but then one of them starts to make personal attacks like, you're ugly, you're fat, you're a loser, that's a sign of some unhealthy conflict. That's a personal attack. It's attacking the person, not the idea. And I'd say that when it comes to disagreements, it's good to keep in mind and it's good to have the mentality that it's not the two of you against each other. No, it's the two of you against the problem. See, I would encourage you, don't see the other person as the enemy. And if you're getting really heated, if you're getting really angry at that person, you just need to zoom out and look at the big picture and remember that you love them. Proverbs 15:1 says, "A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." So whenever you and that other person disagree and argue with each other, respond with a soft answer rather than with grievous words. And so it's a red flag whenever you can't have healthy conflict. Now, red flag number 6 is whenever you can't trust them. Now, in the beginning of a relationship, you shouldn't trust them as much. Not meaning that you distrust them, but you don't trust them as much as you can later. And as you get to know them, then your trust builds. But if you're dating a person that you distrust, or you just realize that you can't trust them, then don't be with them. And so here's some reasons why you might distrust somebody. One is if they have a habit of lying. Maybe you've heard them lie about other things. Maybe they lie a lot to other people. And even if you haven't realized that they've lied to you, then they've still proven that they're a liar. And there's a good chance that if they're a liar, then they're also lying to you, but you just haven't noticed it yet. I also wouldn't trust a person if they have cheated on you. Hey, if they cheat and if you stay with them, then they get the message that it's okay. And if they know that they can cheat and they can get away with it and they can still have you, then they'll probably do it again. And again, I'm not trying to blame the victim here or say that it's your fault that they cheated, but if you're dating a person who's cheated on you, whether that's sleeping with somebody else or going on a date with somebody else or getting too physical with somebody else, then you just need to dump them. And really, if they do it once, then they'll probably do it again. And so I wouldn't trust a cheater. I also wouldn't trust a person who watches the wrong things. If they're into pornography, if they like to watch movies that have scenes with nudity, if they follow a lot of models or immodest people on Instagram, whether they're creators or influencers, I wouldn't trust that person. Hey, I would advise you that if you start to date somebody, then go on their Instagram and see who they're following. Because there's a lot of people that you could follow who aren't good to follow. And if you're a girl with a guy who's following a lot of models or people who post a lot of bikini pictures, then I would take that as a red flag because they have knowingly signed up for things that just aren't good to see. And I think that it's a red flag if the person that you're with never lets you see their phone, because that's a good sign that they're hiding some things that they don't want for you to know about. I also wouldn't trust a person who is really sneaky, and they have a habit of going around people's backs. And I think that if you're a teenager and if their parents don't know that you're in a relationship, then you should stay away from them. And I think that if they're sneaky with you, then there's a good chance that they'll be sneaky without you. And beware of a person who has a habit of doing things in secret, because maybe from what you've seen, it's not against you, but there's actually a good chance that you are the victim of it and they've just kept it a secret from you. And I would even beware of people who do things like cheat on a test or they cheat on their taxes, because that person has proven themselves to be dishonest. They've shown that they don't have good character. And so I wouldn't choose a person who is this way. I wouldn't choose a person who fails to have integrity. And while I wouldn't go to the extreme of saying how you do one thing is how you do everything, I do realize that whatever you do is setting a precedent for the rest of your life. And if a person cuts corners and if they sneak around in some areas, then they're probably doing it in other ways as well. I would also watch out for a person who has a bad reputation or who has a bad testimony. And while I realize that sometimes rumors and false accusations can spread, I also wouldn't be too naive about it. And I'd say that if the people who you trust don't trust them, then you probably shouldn't either. And so if you're dating somebody that you've just realized that you can't trust, then that's a major red flag, and maybe this is a good sign to break up with that person and to end things. Now, red flag number 7 is when things move too quickly. And what I mean by this is when you don't know a person very well and yet you're dating them, when the romantic relationship is much greater than your knowledge of that person. Hey, you shouldn't get too serious with a person that you hardly know. And obviously, in the beginning of a relationship, you don't know the person as well, but sometimes people have relationships with people that they haven't met in person, and they're moving too quick and too fast. And so I encourage you, don't let things get too serious when you don't know them too well. And I think that whenever it comes to long distance relationships, those can really be a struggle, especially if you've never met them in person. And no, FaceTime doesn't count here. Hey, if you've only met this person one time, or if you've maybe been with them for a week at camp, you just don't really know that person too well. And I think that your knowledge of them is just going to be a lot different. It's going to be a lot greater if you've perhaps gone to the same church, went to the same school, worked the same job, if you have the same friend group. If you only know them from phone calls or from FaceTimes, you just don't know them very well. Now, I'm not going to say that a long-distance relationship can't ever work out, but I think that they can really be a struggle. It'd be really easy for that person to be a lot different in person if you don't know them from being in person with them. And it's one thing if you were together in person and then one person moved or went to college or something like that, and you kept up the long distance relationship. But I would be very careful about starting a relationship that's long distance, and it usually just doesn't work out. Not saying that it can't or that it's impossible for it to work out, but it just is really a struggle. I would also say on the topic of things moving too fast is to be cautious about getting married very quickly. And I realize that sometimes couples will get married really quickly and it can work out. But just be careful because that's not always the case. I think that it's really hard to put exact timelines on how long you should be with a person before you get married, and I think that some situations can be different, but I for sure would not marry or get engaged to a person that I had known for less than a year. I think that this is a foolish thing to do, and I think that you just need to be patient. Just be willing to wait. And often the reason why people get married so quickly is just simply impatience. They don't want to wait for certain things. And I would caution you to not marry somebody that you haven't been with for very long, because you don't know that person very well. You might think that you know them, but if you haven't spent a significant amount of time with that person, you're just taking a great risk. It's a risk that you don't have to take. It's unnecessary to marry a person that quickly in a relationship. And now red flag number 8 is when there's a lack of communication. The great missionary Jim Elliot once said, "Wherever you are, be all there." And so I think some practical examples of this is that at the dinner table, don't spend the entire meal on your phone. That means that when the other person needs you, then you make time for them. Neither person in a relationship should ever be questioning whether or not the other person cares. Hey, I think it's a red flag if you're with a person who isn't good about texting back. And no, this doesn't mean immediately replying like 2 minutes later, but if it's been days since they texted you back, then that's a bad sign. It probably means that they're not that into you, or that they don't really care, or maybe even that they're just keeping secrets. And so in a relationship, both people need to be open and honest with each other, which means that you should be expressing your feelings. You should be setting boundaries with that person. It means that you're telling them some essential things that they need to know. And I think that it's a warning sign when the other person isn't open about their past. And this doesn't necessarily mean every detail about their entire life, but if they won't share anything from their past, that's not a good sign. Sometimes in a movie, there'll be a plot line where there's a really rich person and they're so used to other people wanting to be with them for their money. And so now they're just hiding it and they're kind of living a secret life so that people won't just want them for their money. And eventually they fall in love with a person who just loves them for who they are. But the truth of the matter is they lied about who they were, they kept secrets, and the other person fell in love with somebody who doesn't exist. And sure, you might say it's just a movie and maybe you shouldn't be taking it that seriously, but I think that in real life, it's a danger when you're with a person who's not open, whenever they haven't revealed who they truly are. And I would just say that when it comes to communication, be the kind of person that you want for your partner to be. So if you want for them to be caring and empathetic and open and honest, then you should be that way yourself. And I think that both people need to be willing to say things like, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I've been hurt, I need something, I'm not comfortable with this." And I would just tell you that if you have problems, then you need to talk about them. You need to be open about them, because the situation will not get better by ignoring it. And so those are 8 of the biggest red flags in dating, and I want to know, what would you add to this list? And if you have things to add or any questions, then leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more biblical teaching like this.